What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to TOJ Talks. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at WillPal11 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Friday afternoon, kind of a slow news day for the Jets for once. I feel like they upstaged the Super Bowl, which was a terrible game. They upstage everything else. So I guess I'd probably jinx myself. Jason McCourty's hopping on here. He's about to go on a much needed vacation. So we
Yes.
decided to take up his time and talk about the Jets on Valentine's Day. Jason, how we doing? How's everything been?
I'm doing good, man. I started off Valentine's Day good, so I'm all good. My wife woke up. I had to go ESPN today, so I was up 5 o'clock in the morning. I had the gifts laid out for her and for the kids, so I'm good to spend some time with you today because she's happy. Like now, it's just dinner later on tonight, and then hopefully the night goes as planned.
Yeah, I'm cooking some steaks, so that's
Ooh,
always we gotta do what we gotta do. It's the simple things.
happy
Um,
wife, happy life.
yeah, exactly. The simple things that it seems like Aaron Rodgers kind of avoids. I don't want to spend too much time on Rodgers. I've said my piece 800 times. I'm sure you've had to say it 800 times as well. I guess the two questions I have for you: one, were you surprised at all about how it kind of went down in terms of the Jets being the one to kind of make the announcement and making it when they did? Well, semi when they did. And then B, are you surprised with I don't know if you've gotten this as much, but I feel like all year I was really optimistic about Rodgers. I feel like I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I thought he actually is not playing as bad as maybe people are assuming. And I was like, oh, you're such an optimist. And then now everyone's like, oh, the Jets are so stupid. Like, where do you land in this whole Rodgers Jets kind of debate, I guess?
Yeah. I would say I wasn't surprised that they moved on. I said it from the beginning. I just thought, Aaron Glenn, you come in, new head coach, new general manager. To me, you just start afresh. You don't just inherit what the previous regime did. And I think also the way it all happened. You think about it, Robert Saleh, they go out, they get Aaron Rodgers, him and Joe Douglas, and then next thing you know, they go get Randall Cobb. They're going to get Alan Lazard. You're going to get all of these guys that make him happy. It doesn't work. And Roger said it during the season. Hey, if I don't play the way I'm supposed to and we don't figure it out, we're all going to be gone. And that's exactly what happened. They all were gone. So if I'm Aaron Glenn, I don't want to start with a quarterback that has his own idea and ways of winning and having success in the league. And that's not a knock on Aaron to say anything negative. When you're a first ballot Hall of Famer, Super Bowl champion, multiple time MVP, you already know what it takes to be successful in this league. So, as a first time head coach on a young football team, you need to make sure whoever your quarterback is an extension of you. So, if I'm Aaron Glenn, I'm obviously going to have those conversations with Tyrod Taylor, and I'm possibly going to see if there's a quarterback out there that I think maybe fits the bill of exactly what I want in that position. I think that's the most important thing from a culture standpoint and building a team that can be good for the future. The whole Rodgers Jets thing, listen, I'm under the impression if I'm the New York Jets, you sit back and you say, if I'm Woody Johnson, damn, it didn't work, but hell, we tried. There was not a single person when they made that trade for Aaron Rodgers that sat there and said, this is a dumb decision. Aaron Rodgers is washed. You knew he didn't have to be the MVP level quarterback, but you looked at a Jets team that had a damn good defense for the past few years, and you're saying they just need a competent quarterback. Now, when he goes and he tears his Achilles, and then this past year, coming off an Achilles injury when you're over 40 is not going to be that easy. If you watch Kirk Cousins, who struggled this past year coming off an Achilles injury. So our expectations were probably too high. But I think overall, the disappointing thing is you hear rumblings that Garrett Wilson wasn't happy. And if Aaron Rodgers was going to be back, then he didn't want to be there. So it's that part of it where did he elevate the locker room to a point where everybody felt like they were playing the best ball of their career? That's kind of what you were hoping for when you saw Brady go to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and you saw the entire level of the organization just come up to reach where his level of greatness is. So, but that's one of those things where when you're a team that you've been striking out at quarterback for multiple times, Geno Smith didn't work, Sam Darnold didn't work, Zach Wilson didn't work. Why the hell would you not go for Aaron Rodgers and try to get him there? But I appreciate the fact that they cut ties. It didn't work. We're okay with that. You can shake hands and say, hell, we tried, but it's time to move on.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you mentioned there are particularly like I would agree with heavily in terms of this didn't drag out. I think whether it's on purpose or not, we I think a lot of things quote unquote leak for a specific reason, one way or
Mhm.
another. This makes it look like Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji were like, this is our organization now, where no one's bigger than the 53. And not that Aaron, I don't think he kind of begged to get cut all year. Every time he'd open his mouth after the Arizona game, it was like, "Hey, I've never been cut before. It'd really crazy if a 17-year-old cut me." And like it wasn't he doesn't say things by accident. He's
Yeah.
extremely intelligent, and I think he knew this was first of all, him getting cut or retired are the same thing. If you retire, the Jets would have had to pay him the same money they're
Yeah.
gonna have to pay him no matter what. It's a cash
You know what's
bonus.
crazy? As you talk about like the things he says, I think about it the year Brady was in Tampa when he first got there. I remember he threw a pick six against, I want to say, the New Orleans Saints,
Yep,
and Bruce Arians came in the media after, and right away was like, that's all on Brady. And there's a certain level of like when you get somebody of that stature, of like treating them like any other guy on the team to a certain extent. Like I'm not gonna say you treat Brady or Aaron Rodgers the same way as guy 53, but you could tell how much Rodgers was different than everybody else in the locker room, from the McAfee appearances and all those different things. And that goes a long way. I had a teammate that played in Pittsburgh that talked about it. He was like, Big Ben in Pittsburgh, it wasn't like one of the guys. Like he was separate. He was a little bit different. When there was issues, he didn't really go right to the guys. And me being in New England, man, Brady's commenting on guys' Instagram pages and all of those different things, playing cornhole in the locker room, those small things that just make you one of the guys, and people see your greatness and they're just like, damn, I can actually play with Tom. Tom talks to me and all of those different things.
yeah, no, I fully agree because I think it's really difficult, right? He's 42 years old, 41 years old, relating to he's a guy that's made $500 million and is going to walk into the Hall of Fame. He could never play another snap and be one of the five
Yep.
or six best ever. And it's like, how do you relate to somebody that's 21 years old, has made minimal money, maybe some NIL money, and like there's a 6th round pick that it's not even, I don't even blame him. It's a really difficult thing we talk about with coaches, with Bill and, and all these older guys. And Pete kind of acts like he's 40, so it's maybe different.
Yeah,
But generally, like,
it's
I,
true.
and I'm not asking you to say this, but like Bill probably had a harder time relating to guys at the end there where, I don't know, you draft some undrafted kid out of Marshall walks into your building. Like, how are you relating as a 73-year-old guy to a 20-year-old who's made no NIL money, has never been famous, like all this stuff? It's just a difficult thing. Um, Obviously, you mentioned one thing there, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. The players who post on Instagram and Twitter and who doesn't, and the whole social media of like, ooh, look, this guy tweeted a frowny face, like he must be really upset and he must have loved Aaron, and like this guy didn't tweet, so he fucking hates Aaron Rodgers. Like, what do you make of? I will say, I think it says a lot that all the defensive guys were very vocal and the offensive guys weren't. I'll probably leave it at that. But what do you make of this whole new like who posts versus who doesn't, who you're following, which teams? Do you buy into any of that, or is that kind of just I don't. Hey, this guy retweets a bunch of stuff. Now he must love Aaron Rodgers or hate him, vice versa.
To a certain extent, like subliminal messages, I pay no mind to. Like a guy putting something out, it's like, oh, it was just lyrics to a song. But I do think there's something to not only players and play on players, but like when coaches get fired. When you see a coach get fired and you don't see anybody from the team saying like, dang, wish him well. I remember in 21, I'm with Flo in Miami. And when Flores gets fired at the end of that season, like guys are surprised. No one expected it. You're shocked. And a lot of guys, even some coaches, took to Twitter to say, or it didn't have to be anything controversial because you have your own contract and different things, but to say something positive about the person of like, damn, really gonna miss Aaron being around here or something of that extent. So to your point of seeing the defensive guys, because those relationships are very different when you're not dealing with a person play in and play out, or they're not the one yelling at you. And I don't know, I wasn't there to say that's exactly what happened, but I wouldn't read too much into it. But I do think there's something to it when you see guys, especially in this generation where so many guys use social media. Now, if there's a guy that never tweets or never does any of that, you wouldn't expect him to go out of his way to do that. But you do expect, a guy like Rodgers was in that building and they decided to move on from him, not him walking away from the game. If there was a tremendous impact on those around him on the offensive side of the ball, knowing that you could still have him, guys could speak up and say something. But the hard thing of really judging that is if you're a young player in that locker room, you just watched the GM that drafted you and the head coach that drafted you both get fired in one swoop. Like, are you going to be the guy to put out a tweet and now wonder what Aaron Glenn's going to think about your tweet or you on it? So that's the fear that some guys have. You need those made guys to be the ones to speak up. So for a guy where it's like, well, they already cut him, what the hell is my tweet do now? So it's so tough to grade and see and try to really look at that and pull something from it.
Yeah, Quinnen tweeted twice and then just eventually just said "fuck Twitter" and just deleted it. That was a tough look. Not that I don't even blame him. I think he just probably was like, "What's going on here?" I've had Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, and all these guys. And Aaron Rodgers was like to him, I don't blame Quinnen at all. Name value and a defensive player, that's like
Yeah.
you're asking
Look at
somebody
Miles Garrett.
20.
Miles
Yeah,
Garrett just said, trade me. I'm tired of this.
I'm done. Like I can't do it. I think Quinnen's probably a year from that, but if they don't figure it out at some point, he's going to be like, "Hey, man, like the money's nice. I get paid anywhere." Aaron Glenn obviously gets the hire, and I haven't had you on since he got hired. I don't want to talk too much about Darren Muji because I think, frankly, he's an unknown to everybody. No matter how much you ask people that work around him or work with him, etc. Unless you've been in the chair, it's a little hard to evaluate. I guess the same could be said for head coach. That said, he's been a coordinator for a long time now. He's been a position coach. He played in the league, all that stuff. We talk about relating to players. I feel like he has that line. You played for a lot of guys who maybe went the other way on the line of like, he kind of seems extremely intense, but also can relate to some of these guys. What do you make? Did you like the hire? I know they went defense again. He's a first-time coach. Are you good with that? Because it's a team obviously struggled to score points for damn near 15 years at this point.
Yeah, I did like the hire from what everybody says who Aaron Glenn is. To the point you made, I was on when he first got hired, and that was my challenge. Where it's just like if you're the New York Jets, you brought this fiery defensive coordinator that was a hot name that had a ton of success in Detroit, and you go back a few years ago, Robert Saleh had a dominant defense in San Francisco. We saw him going nuts on the sideline, an intense guy. It was just like, well, damn, we feel like we're doing the same thing again. But I think the ties back to the Jets are huge. You have a guy that was drafted there by this organization, and you have a guy that saw up close and personal Dan Campbell and what he was about and how he built something. I think that's very important too. A team that was struggling in the Detroit Lions, who hadn't been in the playoffs in a very long time, who saw was staying consistent along the course and what that's going to get you. And I would say what I liked about Aaron Glenn was this past year, we watched a Detroit Lions defense that was just decimated with injuries and probably some of the most adverse situations you're going to have as a unit on one side of the ball. And they still were competitive every single week, no matter who they brought in. Jamal Adams gets there, and within a week, he's on a practice squad. And he's out there playing in a primetime game for them. So that's important to me because sometimes we hire coordinators and it's just like, all right, Aaron Glenn's not calling plays anymore. So this isn't about X's and O's. It's about how can you build a culture where guys come in and they understand what the standard is and they go out there and they execute whatever the game plan is. So seeing him do that this past year to me is just as important of seeing him being able to call a blitz in a certain time point or seeing him on Hard Knocks and how he relates to players is continuing to get guys ready to go week in and week out.
Yeah, no, I agree. Your brother brought it up. I guess it was maybe a week or two ago of how like when he's yelling at guys, there's not the head down, like I don't respect you, I'm tuning you out. It was like, no, I'm locked into what you're saying because I know it's worth it's kind of worth the price of admission. We've talked a lot about, and I don't know if there's a perfect answer to this because I don't think we'll know, but when you start to go, hey, who should the Jets add in the draft? Who should they be able to add in free agency? And usually, guys usually bring a couple of people over that know the system, know the scheme, and can kind of help drive the culture. We've seen it. Bart Scott did it with the Jets. We've seen it a million other times. It's like, what's an Aaron Glenn player look like? Is there a guy to you that from that Lions teams, or even could have been from the Saints teams that resembles this is what we like an Aaron Glenn guy would be looking for? Because he talked a lot about having a big input in that in these drafts with the Lions and who they add defensively. I kind of think of Brian Branch a lot of just I don't know, maybe it's just the DBs thing and him and Kirby Joseph. He just had those guys flying around. Are those the guys you think of? I know everyone goes to Hutch because he's probably the best player, but I don't know if that's I
No,
guess
yeah, I wouldn't say Hutch because I think about the Hard Knocks a few years ago where him and Deuce were on opposite sides coaching and they're cursing each other out as they're out there competing in training camp. And that seems to be who Aaron Glenn is. So you talk about Hutchinson, yeah, he's a tremendous player and he goes out there and his motor never stops. But when you talk about Brian Branch, when you talk about Kirby Joseph, of the trash talking and not afraid to shoulder whatever anybody has to say. Not that you want to encourage it, but Brian Branch flipping the birds on his way out when he gets tossed out of a game. People calling Kirby Joseph a dirty player because he's cutting the tight end, coming over the middle. Like they don't care. Signing a guy like Carlton Davis, who's an in-your-face type of corner in free agency, to me, those are the things that you're saying, all right, well, this is the type of player that he wants to have. Getting a guy like Malcolm Rodriguez there late in the draft and then drafting Jack Campbell and getting these guys, Alex Anzalone, that are in your face and not afraid of the moment. You're intrigued. You get these coaches come from Detroit. You start to look at their free agents. Dan Skipper is a free agent, who was their sixth offensive lineman. Kevin Zeitler is a free agent. You look at guys like that.
Carlton
Bart
Davis.
Scott, who?
Carlton Davis is a free agent as well.
Carlton Davis is a free agent as well. Was just with Bart Scott earlier, and he mentioned a guy like Hendon Hooker. They go and they bring Teddy Bridgewater back, and they put Bridgewater right ahead of Hendon Hooker. Is there a possibility of trying to get a guy like Hendon Hooker, somebody that knows the system? The hard part for the Jets is we mentioned it. Aaron Rodgers is now gone. All right, who's the quarterback? And that's the toughest thing because you look around the league right now and who the free agents are going to be. You can say, all right, Jameis Winston is a guy that was with him in New Orleans. He's a guy that you talk about culture and locker room. He's a guy that everybody absolutely loves him no matter where he is. Play on the field, you're going to get production. You're also going to get deduction because he's going to give the ball to the other team. So like that's the part where you're trying to figure out who is the next guy. If you go out and get a guy like Justin Fields and say, you know what, he's young enough that maybe we can build around him. That's very different than what we saw in the Jared Goff that was running this type of system. So that's the part where you're like, all right, who is he going to be from an offensive standpoint of, all right, what does he want to see? Because that to me was always a challenge. When you have a defensive minded head coach, a lot of times their input on what the offense looks like is based on what's hard for them to defend. So is it a running quarterback, a dual threat guy that can do multiple things to that nature?
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned a couple things there. The quarterback question is going to be extremely interesting. We haven't really talked a lot about like did Rodgers fit the Lion? If I don't know, we don't know again what they're going to run, but theoretically speaking, they run the Lion system like a lot of like 7-step drop play, deep play action under center stuff. Rodgers didn't go under center basically at all last year because he ran everything out of the pistol. I mean, third, 4th and 1s, he's running out of the pistol. So I don't
Mhm.
know. I don't know if that even would have worked. Maybe the
Yeah,
Jets would have tailored it one way or another, but then you're learning another new scheme. Again, I think you think of Fields to me as the one name where I am not going to sit here and tell you Justin Fields is a Drew Brees level accuracy and like thrower of the football, but he's gotten better. He's still a guy who was a top 10 pick, and he's not. He's kind of followed the same Darnold and
hmm
Baker trajectory where he just went and sat in a good organization for a year. Did he learn
hmm
enough? He thought he played decently well. I mean, again, let's be realistic about like what he was doing, but they were doing well with him. You
four
think
and
of Brees
two.
Hall and Garrett Wilson, they obviously play together. Could they just lean on Brees and Justin Fields heavily and try to run the football, play good defense again? I think that's one thing that we don't. I don't want to give Rodgers too much of a hard time on. Like the defense fell apart this year.
Yeah.
Doubt. You mentioned that kind of the trash talking and just maybe the identity of what Aaron Glenn did. Sauce Gardner's a guy who Sauce had a good year last year, but obviously the expectation as a guy who came in and was just all pro right away. So you're in a different conversation, whether people like it or not. That's what happens in the league. Like you have no
Sure.
expectation into. I expect you to literally be like, I expect you to be the best player in the field every time. And I last year just was a little off. The tackling was weird. There's a couple games
hmm
left and came back. I don't know what was really going on. Do you expect him to be back to all pro form? I mean, he's talked about how Salo was his guy, and now he's all about it. Eric Glenn. Like, what does he need to do to get back to peak Sauce? Because I think again, he was good, but they need him to be great for this defense to really take back like a top 5 spot in the league.
I think a reset, and I think, man, there's nothing like, and I can't imagine it because I didn't have the level of success that he has, but to come in the league and hit the ground running and right away. I can remember talking to my brother. He goes to the Pro Bowl, has 7 interceptions in his first year, and it sets an expectation that is sky high. And for my brother, that second year he comes in and has a down year, and everybody is ripping him. And I can remember the training in the offseason after his rookie year versus the training in the offseason after his second year, and how determined he was to come
Second
back
team All Pro, and
and
he was a
prove
bum.
yo, to prove that he was that guy. So you think about it for Sauce Gardner, you come in and your first 2 years, everybody's just ranting and raving about how good you are. And then in his third year, now there's question marks. There's question marks about his toughness, his willingness to tackle. And then on the other side, Derek Stingley is going off in Houston, and he's the guy that's all pro, that's Pro Bowl, and all of those things as they'll be compared their entire careers. So I look at it for him as just, it's getting back to basics. Like, I guarantee you this offseason it's not going to be him playing golf and him tweeting and talking about all of those things. He's back in the lab and is just focused on football. And sometimes the reset around you helps, because now Aaron Glenn and those defensive coaches, they all come in there, Wilkes and those guys, and they're looking at him like, well, we don't know you. So, like, we have to get to know you and know who you are and what you're about. And I'm sure he's going to want to prove that I'm that guy, because I'm sure he's looking at the Detroit Lions and how they have played since Aaron Glenn has been there. The amount of man-to-man, the amount of press, the amount of blitzing, that only works when you have guys on the outside that can hold up and that can cover. And the Lions fell apart because those guys on the outside got hurt. So you get a Sauce Gardner, you got a Michael Carter second in the slot. You got to figure out who's going to be on the outside with DJ Reed being a free agent, but they have the pieces there to continue to grow. You said a Carlton Davis or somebody like that. You have the same makings to be able to play that same defense, and a lot of it's going to be contingent on Sauce Gardner. If they are playing well on defense, it's going to be because he's having an All-Pro style year.
Yeah, I'd like to see him travel more this year. I think it would just be nice to be able to be like, hey, when we need you
I
to,
agree.
and like I think it almost would remotivate him, because otherwise you sit on the side, no one throws at
Keeps
you.
you
You get,
locked in.
yeah, you get like, I don't want to say you get bored, but like you do get a little bored. You're just like, all right, the ball's not coming, and then when it does, I think in the Colts game, I think you called that game. He gets beat, or someone gets beat not taking number one, going vertical in cover two, but regardless. And it's just finger pointing and like, I don't know whose fault that was. It was because like no one's thrown at me all game, and then
Nah, you're right.
safety was it
Following a guy is a totally different
totally different.
mindset, man. I watched Gilmore do it, and Gilmore wouldn't want a double team, because his thing was, if he was doubling with somebody else and the guy doubling blew it, it was going to look like it was his
Yeah, it's
fault.
on him.
So his thing was just like, let me go cover the guy I got, and if he does make a catch, there's no doubt that it was on me. But when you have those one-on-one matchups, you look at the end of the game, you look at the stat line, and it's either you shut him down or he went off on you, and that's a different mental approach throughout the entire game.
Yeah, last couple of things here. We've talked a lot about quarterbacks, obviously the number one thing. I guess we'll just address this quickly. There's been a lot of this week, a couple mock drafts. They just trading off to one. Again, I don't know. I don't know what it's going to take, because I don't think anyone's doing the Panthers Bears trade again, which was like 3 1s and 2 2s and a
Mhm.
player. I mean, that was obviously a terrible trade. Regardless, Bryce could end up being a good player, and
I know what you mean.
it wasn't a good move. Although the Bears didn't actually do a lot with a lot of picks, but regardless, if would you consider trying to get up to one if you're the Jets and saying like, hey, we got Cam Ward, why can't we be Washington? Like, hey, we got new coach, the roster's a lot better than people probably realize. If this guy's even 20% better than we had last year, we might be in a
Hmm.
good spot. And like, where's your line of, hey, I'd call and I'd see what it costs, but after that, I'm probably going to say, hey, I'll just sit at 7 and take best player available.
See, here's my thing with the quarterback spot. I'm not going to pretend to know college football the way people that have watched it all season long, but you've heard a lot throughout the course of this leading up to the combine and draft of a lot of people saying Shador Sanders and Cam Ward in another draft probably wouldn't even be first round draft picks. And I think like that's where you have to start. I remember hearing Brandon Beane talking about trading up to get Josh Allen, and at the end of the day, screw them picks when you get a guy that's a guy. And Josh Allen is a guy, so it doesn't matter. You think about when the Chiefs, you trade up, you get a guy like Patrick Mahomes. You get a guy, so it doesn't matter. My issue is when you're a quarterback desperate team and you're just making moves and trading up to get a guy just because he is the guy available. That's to me when the issue comes up. So it's just like to your point, and I would say it's probably two ones. As your point, if you feel like Shador Sanders or Cam Ward at that first spot, like they ultimately change this organization and we're set up for the future, then hell, go for it. Those two ones, if he's Jaden Daniels, it doesn't matter if it was 5 ones, because now you have
Worth
a
it.
guy that you're going to have free agents that want to come. You're going to be able to do some things. But if you do all of that and you end up with this top pick and you draft Zach Wilson and you don't have the right infrastructure around him, then you just set your entire organization back. We talked about that today, where you think about the whole Aaron Rodgers thing doesn't happen if Zach Wilson is the guy that you need him to be at the number 2 pick. So I'm okay with trading up to move to the number 1 spot. As long as the guy you're moving up for, you are 1000% convinced that he is a franchise quarterback and a game changer and a culture changer, and you're not just going for that guy because he's the top pick or the top quarterback in the draft. That's my biggest issue with that. And they'll have you and your family moving looking for a
Yeah.
different destination.
No, like I'm on the same page as you. I think Cam's the one guy. It's like at least you could argue, hey, he might have been quarterback 4 last year, or 3 or 4, depending on what you look at. But like that was a generational class. So at least maybe, sure. To me, I've made it very clear. Like I think he's a lot closer to a second round quarterback. That I think he's a lot of Jared Goff, which again we've seen Jared Goff have success in this system, but I don't know that I want to be paying Jared Goff $60 million a year. And that's what the Lions are now going to be doing. And I don't know if I want to give 3 1s for Shador. Where Cam Ward, at least I think the ceiling is like, ooh, like
Some of the intangibles.
yeah, some of the intangibles, and then I'm not going to get started the Jackson Dart thing. The Jets, the TikTok e-boy stuff, the Jets need to probably stay away from for a little while. Last 2 things here. Obviously, we've seen, you know, I don't want to like necessarily say like we don't have to go into specific players from a draft perspective, but let's just say the Jets stay put at 7. Where's your head go immediately on draft night of, okay, the Jets draft this position? You're like, oh, okay, makes sense. Is it D-line for the 800th time? Although they probably need more help next to Quinnen, actually. And realistically, Jermaine off an Achilles, do you want him playing 65% of snaps right away? Is it corner? Because there's obviously you mentioned DJ Reed's going to walk. Is it receiver? Is it offensive line again? Like, where do you land in terms of this would give you the, like, you see Jets pick whoever it is. Like, okay, it makes sense. Like, is there one spot position wise you're like, okay, that's probably where I would have gone to?
The crazy thing is, you watch the Super Bowl and you mentioned defensive line, and you see how the Eagles won that game, and who could obviously Jalen Hurts got the MVP and deserved the MVP, played well. But you could argue that they could have given the MVP to the front four, the entire defensive line, how dominant they were in that game. And even for the Jets over the last few years, when they had chances at the playoffs late in that season, I know quarterback play was atrocious, but a lot of it had to do with how dominant they were up front at that defensive line spot, because it sets the tone and the tempo for the entire team. So I would be very okay with them getting somebody in the trenches, especially on the defensive line, but the offensive line as well. And my thing is, at that 7th pick, if there's a guy that you feel like is a cornerstone, I know we will continue to talk about quarterback and you need one to win. But at the same time, I just think about sometimes you look at the Eagles when they drafted Jalen Hurts, and obviously they had Carson Wentz, so it wasn't like they were a quarterback needy team. But you think back when the Seahawks drafted Russell Wilson, and that's not the ideal way or the normal way to do it. But if you have a team built around and you are able to plug a player in, I think that goes a long way. If you're in a position to get a quarterback high up and he can change the program, great, do it. But if not, get the best available player that's going to impact your organization. You get a guy coming off the edge with Quinnen Williams and you able to get after the quarterback and stop the run, it changes everything.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the mindset of unless you can get up to 1 and get Cam Ward and say, hey, this is our guy. Probably roll with Fields, a rookie, and Tyrod or something of that nature. Try to win 9, 10 games. Can you beat Pittsburgh or Denver this year? And then you do the Josh Allen Mahomes thing in next year, which is supposed to be a great class. Then you're like, everything's ready for a guy to come in that can play right away. I think it's more ready than it's ever been for the Jets in terms of a lot of ways, but is
They
this
have a lot. They do have a lot.
is this the class to do it? Last question for you. Obviously, you went from studio every day, playing the studio every day. Then you were now this year you're doing mixer of both. But
Mhm.
how many times a game were you calling a game and being like ripping your hair out? Seeing, well, you don't have any hair, but if you had proverbial hair, if you had Clay Matthews hair, were you ripping your hair? Because like, I didn't play in the NFL, and I find myself 800 times like, dude, what are you doing? Like, he's open, throw the ball, and all these different stuff. Do you find yourself doing that more than when you were just with Good Morning Football?
Oh, dude, I got a chance to do the pregame show NFL Today for the wild card division, and I'm sitting next to Bill Cowher, and we're watching a football game. So for me, it's such a treat, and just to hear, and now doing the games, you're looking at so much more than when you were a player, and I'm just basically watching receiver DB play, and now you're trying to look at the whole picture, and hearing Bill Cowher as the game's unfolding, and like there's a lead, and there's like 11 minutes left in the game, and he's talking about running the football and how you're managing the clock at that point with the anticipations of when timeouts are going to be called, with the 2 minute, everything that goes into it. Now, when I'm watching the game, you see some of the things and you're starting to study, you're just like, why are they throwing the ball right here? Damn, why didn't they use a timeout? And you're questioning everything because that now is your job to do it. So absolutely now calling games, especially calling the games because you're diving into everything about those two teams for that week. So you're able to read everything that the beat reporters are saying. You're listening to the press conferences and you're following along leading up to what happened in that game, opposed to your point. When you're in the studio and I'm watching all 32 teams all the time and you're watching games on Sunday and all that, you're not getting a chance to dive in and being able to see all the film of all the games. Although there's so many guys, my guy Kurt Warner, Darren Orlovsky, those guys who say they watch every single snap. Doing I try to do it this year. You're watching the majority of them, but it's extremely hard to catch every single thing that happens with teams. So that to me is the biggest thing is you're questioning of why for a lot more things. You're understanding it, which makes you more curious to those things. And doing games, like I'm having conversations with players and coaches every single week. So you're learning so much football because I can be doing a game with, for say this past year, let's just say the Giants and the Eagles, and I'm talking to Dable and Sirianni. And then that next week you're doing another game, but you remember what Dable told you about his thought process on the 2 minute drill. So it was a crazy experience. I've never been able to do that, traveling for 18 straight weeks and talking to so many players and coaches. So yeah, your antennas pop up. And if I did have hair, I would be looking like I was right now by the end of the season.
Did you wear the Super Bowl ring? And because like most people in the league don't have one, obviously, unless it's very specific teams. Like I think only Rodgers and Mahomes now hurts, right? I think there's nobody else and Stafford with rings. Did you wear it every week just to be like, you know?
You know
No?
what? I didn't wear it not one single week. I don't know how welcomed I'd be if I'm walking in there with that big ass ring every
You didn't
week.
want to walk into the Jets Colts game with a Super Bowl ring on, and be like, you should have drafted me, you
They're
fucking
just
idiot.
looking at me like, really, dude? Like,
Yeah.
you say you should have drafted me. They're all like, I wasn't here back in 2009. I didn't know who the hell you were.
There's more people in the Jets building from
That's probably true.
2009 that are still roaming around. But hey, look, you know, well, the Jets will figure it out eventually, potentially. But at least Jets Patriots, maybe Vrabel, Aaron Glenn, you get a nice little week one. I feel like that could be good TV. Maybe you guys will be on the game because realistically, I don't know if we're seeing the Jets in prime time or the Patriots this year. Maybe not.
I,
Maybe.
I like the way you said it. It's just like maybe you'll be on the game. Both teams are shitty enough for the
Well,
fourth
we
crew to
talked
be
about
able
it.
to.
You're gonna get to.
I know.
I want you, regardless, Jason. Appreciate you obviously taking some time, enjoy a little bit of a break here, and then be full fledged in the off season, draft season, and maybe we'll talk about a quarterback that's not named Tyrod Taylor. We'll see. Who knows? No
We'll see.
disrespect to Tyrod, but usually Tyrod's there. The guy who takes over for Tyrod is usually very good. So that's what I'm gonna hold out. Hold out hope.
Fingers
Fingers
crossed.
crossed. Just don't stab him in the chest, and we'll be okay. I appreciate Jason. I'll be back on the feed Tuesday, but appreciate everybody and have a great rest of your weekend.